Greetings, everyone. I'm glad you could all join us. My name's Jeremy Gully, and I will be somewhat of a moderator today. Likely, I hope to be a good discussion on some emerging solutions in a complicated space. So I'm not only the superintendent of a public school here in rural Indiana, but I'm also a member of the Partner Alliance for Safer Schools Board. So for those who are on our webinar who are unfamiliar with the work of PASS, generally speaking, as a school administrator, I found the framework and document very, very helpful. Complicated, decision makers flooded with all kinds of solutions from all kinds of sectors and just not knowing where to start. So for those practitioners in the field that are on this webinar, or even school safety employees, whether they're security managers or just a school resource officer who just is seen as that role in a school district, please take the time to go to PASS and use those guidelines. Experts there are remarkable. Yeah. Very practical. Also today on our webinar is Michael Garcia, who is the National End User Manager, K-12 Specialist at HID Global. And my colleague, Guy Grace, who has tremendous experience in the school security field as a security director and manager many years. Also very much involved in the practical work of the Partner Alliance for Safer Schools, or PASS, as the vice chair. So without further delay, we have about 45 minutes to listen to and discuss among ourselves Michael's information today, and hopefully some Q&A at the end. So Michael, you'll take control.
Thank you, Jeremy. Thanks, Guy. So as you can see from the presenter slide here, got some good company. We're in good company here. Guy Grace has probably forgotten more than most people know about how to secure a school and what not to do when something happens, right? And that's why he's the chairman of PASS from the advisory committee standpoint. And as far as PASS goes, I'll let Guy, talk a little bit about how PASS was founded and the role of PASS. But I think everybody out there should download the guidelines and use them at their schools on a daily basis. It's the North Star for school safety and security. It's the direction you need to go to for a layered approach and a tiered approach to security. So Guy, go ahead.
Well, I thank you. And I'd like to say that the Partner Alliance was established in 2014. Their focus was to provide school administrators and school boards with a awareness of public safety for security professionals, basically providing information to implementing a layered and tiered approach to securing and enhancing the safety of school environments. So when we look at that over the many years, we've had 6 revisions, and we've had many white papers and technical papers, and we do this in an agnostic way. So what we look like in an agnostic way is there's multiple vendors and multiple service providers out there that can provide these different services and products to help our end users, K-12 end users out there, in implementing sound life safety components into their K-12 schools. When we look at that, we realize in PASS that every school is different. You've seen one school, you've seen one school. So it's important when we look at a layered approach to school safety that, many things are applicable for some schools and some things are not. So we do try to put in a tiered approach to school safety that helps to basically for schools to implement things in a holistic way that is cost effective and sustainable. So thank you, Michael.
Welcome. And just so everybody will realize something with PASS, schools don't have anything to point to, honestly. I mean, the federal government has NIST, the DOD has, DISA and DODIS and Defense Information Systems Agency, and schools have nothing to point to for safety and security. These guidelines really, really help. And I really love working with the PASS group, Jeremy, Guy, and all the rest of us out there that work on this daily, and they're out there for you. Download them, please. So the session overview here, we're stressing the fact that mobile credentials play a huge part for first responders in K-12 from an emergency management perspective. So we're going over first the key motivators, why? The vulnerability of what we used yesterday and what we're using today, and how to manage these in real time, right? Then we're going through price and cost savings for schools, which is always important. When you're selling to schools, it's always, there's always budgets involved. Human resources, IT, and police department challenges. These three they play a huge role in safety and security, all three of them for the school districts. And, we need to look at some of the ways that we can help them utilize their resources and save money, but act in the most rapid manner possible to save lives, right? So administration challenges. Administration sets the rules based on school board governance. So administrators have their challenges, as Jeremy will be able to show you today, and as we'll talk about as we've assisted superintendents and school boards today. And this is one way to do it. So the big topic here, the reason we're all here today, is security and emergency management, using mobile for tactical and medical response, right? Law enforcement, after active shooter drills, provisioning the first responders to access your school in a faster way. The role of cards and keys and the lock boxes that the fire department uses for rapid access to the school when an emergency happens, and the advantages of mobile. So, there's some things that have affected schools here recently that are really, really horrible. And that's fentanyl overdoses, allergic reactions, and the nurses bringing EpiPens into the training. So we'll go over some of those things as well. So as you can see, and we talked about earlier, one of the advantages of PASS is we take this from a layered approach, the layers of protection, right? And so as you can see from the slide, the district-wide layer, property perimeter, parking lot, and inside of those are components. And those components, of course, start with people. People are the standard here. This is what we're working on. As my good friend Guy Bleisner from the Idaho Department of Education says, security products don't fail, people fail, right? So right away, you'll see policies and procedures and the people that make them work. And then from there on, you'll see access control and video surveillance towards the bottom. People, process, technology, in that order. Well, this layered approach right here takes those and injects them into every one of these layers. So peel the onion mentality, just like they use in the federal government to secure America's secrets and to secure our most precious assets that make us who we are. We're looking at keeping that, what they call the soft inner middle, right? The classroom as protected as possible with layers wrapped around it. I'll let Guy continue with this, but just letting you know that there's access control in each one of these layers.
Well, when we look at the components of layers in PASS, at the Partner Alliance for Safer Schools, we look at the importance that, as Michael stated, implementing technology into our people's roles and processes. It's so important because we're protecting people. And what we're doing here with PASS and what you do as industry providers or as protectors, you're enabling those teachers to teach and those students to learn, but also too for our communities to function during the day. When there is an incident at the school, let's say a mass casualty event or an active threat situation, that has a tremendous disruption on the communities that the schools reside in. So when we look at those things, anything that we can do to mitigate that risk or risk to our students and staff and our guests in those campuses is very important. So when we look at that, these components and these layers of security, as we approach a school, we look at our vulnerabilities and how we can basically mitigate those vulnerabilities going forward. So the big thing we're going to be talking about today is when we're looking at is mobile credentials and how that fits into these components and layers and how valuable this new implementation will be for ensuring a response to not just an active threat situation in a school, but also other emergency preparedness situations that may arise. When we look at schools on any given day, many things can happen. They're basically an extension of the communities they reside in. So if you have a school district with 20,000 people, you're going to have medical emergencies every day. You're going to have situations that require an emergency response. So when we're looking at this, we're not just looking at active threat situations, we're looking at an all hazards response. And that's why it's one of the most important, and basically what we're talking about today is a very important feature that can enhance the safety and security on our campuses.
Right. And just to talk about that slide one more second, and in respect to Jeremy and what he does for his school, I believe that Jeremy, and he's been in many magazines and received many awards for what he's done at the school from a safety and security standpoint, but utilizes this in a way that you can point to and say, hey, we want to look at Jeremy's school as a model for what he's doing, how he's implementing this as a pass district, and going about that same way, because replication works when you're looking at somebody that understands it and has used it successfully, like Jeremy.
Well, thanks for the kind comment. First of all, I say, as a superintendent currently working in the field, I don't make a dime working with PASS. As a board member, all pro bono. I believe in the word, and we benefited from it. So the framework you saw earlier, if you've not downloaded, it's very logical, straightforward, simple. I love the domains and then the tiers, so that you can look at your own contacts and say, where do you want to be across the options you've got. So when we talk about access control and getting first responders into a school quickly, absolutely necessary. So I think most schools have gotten fairly good at understanding and implementing access control. You can't just walk into a school anymore. Prior to Columbine, you could, but now I've never been to a school where I didn't have to go to a front door and push a button and talk to somebody. Yeah. So things have gotten better and changes have been made, but we've even done better, I think, in our schools at getting single points of entry, and this is why I like the PASS product, because it gives you some standards to consider when you make that decision. Yeah. Because you have so much information coming at you, it's hard to sort it out. So I like that ability to use that product that way. Yeah. So you see schools down that have, but every time we create a solution, or at least that's the perception of a school administrator like me, we create 2 or 3 more new problems. So it's challenging. So for example, you've got better access control in your schools now. But it's like, what happens if the worst thing happens? And now you've got to get first responders into that school. Sure. So I know for a fact Mike's going to talk about that momentarily. Yeah. But we're work in progress, and I'll just transition and say, don't let the problem overwhelm you as a school security director or an administrator. You're not going to solve it overnight. It really is continuous improvement, getting the basics in first, access control, and then dealing with how you get first responders to where they're needed is a pretty basic layer too. So yeah. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, and thank you, Jeremy, and that just goes to show you how this has been used to success, but also how Jeremy and his team, his group at the school combine these processes. They combine the mental health piece, the social emotional learning, behavioral intervention, trauma-informed approaches with school hardening, and then the emergency security operations planning, which we're about to talk to. Guy Grace, same thing in his former school district, Littleton Public Schools, where he retired after many years of successful service and taking that district to a much higher standard in safety and security, one that I would be there visiting, and 5 or 6 school districts would come in and go visit with Guy to look at his unified command and control center, right? And so they had command, contain, and control of the entire district. So it was district-wide visualization with the ability to lock and open any door in the district. And they were doing this with 3 people. So it was a beautiful thing to see. People would come in and they try to model after it, and many have. And actually taking what Guy's built and taking it to a higher standard. Jeremy's done some of it. They did some in Indiana, and they're doing a lot of good things in Idaho as well. But it all came from that. And I want to switch over to this slide right here, because it means a lot to me. This slide right here was taken from a conversation that we were having at the Campus Safety Conference in Nevada last week, a couple weeks ago. And Guy Grace and I were having a conversation talking about this exact thing in this webinar here that we're on with you guys. And he's talking like this. And you this is coming from a gentleman who I respect it wholeheartedly because of the fact that he's been there, he's done that. He was in these situations, and he knows what response means to not only neutralizing the threat of an active shooter, but also providing medical care in an environment where it's a tactical environment, right? So it's tactical medical. So I'll let Guy talk about this and Guy, take it away.
Okay, so mobile credentials, when used with a first responder door numbering system, and when we say that first responder door numbering system, many of you that are school officials or law enforcement officials, you've been implementing door numbering systems. You can find what we're referencing to a door number system on page 31 of the Partner Alliance for Safer Schools Revision 6 guidelines. So if you want an understanding of what we're talking about, we're going to talk about that a little bit later, what that is, but you can visit that and understand that. But when we were looking at that first responder numbering system, we think about that, the correlation of adding or having card readers and how we would get access into the schools was absolutely critical. What we're seeing here, what we're talking about today is something people like myself, we dreamed of having this ability in, say, 1999 during the Columbine tragedy or other events, or looking at day-to-day business events. They offer an unmatched rapid emergency response for law enforcement and EMS personnel. When used in combination with mobile address pinpoint accuracy, what we're talking about, if you attended our last presentation, for example, mobile address is very popular in schools, and it offers pinpoint accuracy, especially when we're looking at location services. And then you'll look at a presentation we're going to be doing next week on secure vestibule bills. But what you're seeing is unified approach. They could easily become the next standard issue in the first responder toolbox. Mobile credentials offer solutions for emergency situations across all hazards in the K-12 emergency preparedness environment. As an incident command tool for multiple mass campus events, where every school is put in a lockdown, they could be invaluable in enhancing the ability for students to learn and teachers to teach. And what we're meaning is this is an ability to offer a quick response into the facilities when there is an emergency that is going on. It needs time is the essence. When I look at this, like, for example, being in an active shooter incident, say in 2013, when we handed out building keys to law enforcement, think about the time that takes us to do that. Think about the time that it takes away from our response. So we look at that, taking away that's how do I say that, that cumbersome node of transferring keys and having that ability for responders to get in quickly is important. But also, too, having the ability to organize who is going into the school with partitioning of an access control system is actually basically what we're talking about here, is facilitating a quicker response and also keeping out vulnerabilities and other situations that could be detrimental to the school safety program at a school.
And as you probably saw in the news on LinkedIn and in the social media, Omaha Public Schools has just done this, right, with the first responders for a more rapid response. And they did it with badges. And that's, a nice transition from, of course, brass keys to the badges and the plastic cards. But that is a real chore when you're looking at doing this on a mass scale. And you're taking, police departments, sheriff's departments, state police, and you're having a unified response, right, for the most rapid. In some of the South Texas school districts that I deal with, their first responders are Border Patrol, like in Uvalde. And we had been saying that for 10 years to Uvalde is, your first responder is going to be BORTAC, the Border Patrol Tactical Unit. So those types of things and managing those from a unified portal, online, and being able to provision and deprovision these badges is really important. I applaud Guy for being one of the the thought leaders in this space, and for being able to take this to the next level. Because as Jeremy and I were talking about yesterday, the smartphone is something that we all have. We won't lend it out to anyone. You know, it has a password and a biometric to protect it. So there's 2, sometimes 3-factor authentication involved with it. And if it's lost, you know, it's just something we can track it, and we feel totally helpless when we lose it, because that's like losing, you know, a part of a piece of your anatomy. And if we forget it, we'll go back and we'll go get it. We'll be halfway to work, we'll turn back and we'll go get it. So it's always with us. This right here is just a real quick slide that we wanted to present. We talked about this for the last couple of weeks. And if you advance the slide, Max, we can show kind of just some of the statistics. It's, you know, things we all know. Usually it's a huge market. It just validates the fact that smartphone revolution is here. It's not going anywhere. We're blessed. It's a blessing and a curse, both, right? But it's here. And if we use it, if we have the right, the ability to put our security and safety into what we use on a daily basis, makes it a lot easier. We don't have to, you know, fumble around looking for a lost key card that was given to us by the security director in the patrol car. You know, we don't have to worry about what keys the key fob is on. There's many different things which we'll talk about here in a second.
Well, I would also say we're not advocating for this to replace a ID card. An ID card, what we mean by that is a staff ID card that a staff member in the school would display. It's actually a very valuable, how do I say, life safety component for a staff member in a school or somebody working in the school to have a ID card display. In no way are we recommending that to replace this, but what we're really looking at this to be is an ability for an expedition or expediting a response, taking away the minutes and seconds that may save a life or may de-escalate a situation or thing that we are responding to in a school. And when we look at that, it's just logical. Every law enforcement officer, every police or fire official, there's many of, we're not saying this is going to replace a fire Knox box, but I would challenge anybody that's a police officer in here or a security professional. Often we've had, and I've heard this not only in my place of work, but other places across the country, that they experience challenges, law enforcement, in getting into law enforcement or into a fire Knox box and things. Often and I understand why the fire officials would not want us in there, because they need us to have those keys. So when we look at those situations, this is a way to facilitate a response for law enforcement and other security professionals in there to protect the schools. But also another thing I would say too, and Mike will talk about this, is when we have substitute teachers, those of you that are security directors or human resources, you realize that you don't want to, many cases, you don't want to give a substitute a card access to any building on the in the district or specific buildings, but you want to give them card access on a day-to-day basis when they are subbing at a school. So there's a lot of HR impacts that this can have as well going forward. Jeremy, do you have anything you'd like to add to this as well?
It's just a matter of where you were, where you're at, and where you're going. I'm always fascinated and willing to listen on solution providers and the new technology that's there, but don't let the great be the enemy of the good. As you said, we started out with brass keys. It's moved to cards. It may move into a more mobile credential, and I think a lot of us from the administrative side are willing to look at that. But yeah, I think worst case scenario, I sit around and what keeps me up at night is it's the active shooting thing. I understand it's all hazards. Certainly I've seen those hazards, but when a parent sends their kid to school, that's what's on their mind nowadays. So 2/3 of these school shootings last less than 2 minutes, and the response time, if you're lucky, is 5. So when we have, in our case, we have the crisis alert system where I still carry a badge, I still have an ID, but I can hit a button a certain number of times and that building's locking down. Mass notification with PA announcement, computer override messaging, and our 911 dispatch center sees that same map that we're talking about with the numbering systems, the digital floor plan. And now we're getting situationally aware and understood of how to locate where that alarm was set off to confront the threat or deal with the medical situation. So I think that's a great piece that we have. We don't currently have a mobile solution, so I'm learning like the rest of the folks on this thing. That's interesting, some of where this may be headed, but yeah, I definitely feel like our schools have got a mass notification system that works consistently for us now. Didn't have that a year or two ago.
Sure. That's right.
Getting people into the building, I'm probably looking like most school districts in the country. Probably have a proximity card and have the Knox box. And guess what?
Yep.
Fire department won't let police use it. So we have two now. So that's kind of where we were without anything, or we're advancing and to where we're at now. But the problem of getting people in quickly to the right place, understanding what's going on there. Yeah. And we gave our police officers the cards and they keep them in their patrol car. That got us away from keys, because once you issue out keys, you never control them again. If you really want to admit it, at least we can turn things on and off with the card. But I also appreciated the comments about the nature of cell phones. People, they absolutely jealously guard them. If someone loses a card, they'll probably be a week before I know it. In order to turn it off, because they're embarrassed. But they lose.
No, that's a huge one, Jeremy, right there. Is I've been to school districts. Yeah, I've been to school districts where the employees won't report the lost card for a week or more because they don't want to pay the $10 to get a new one, and it just gets to where it's humans take over, our thought processes take over, and we don't think about the safety and security vulnerabilities about this. Here's an example. One of the manifestos that pop up after a school shooter is after the school shooting is over and all the smoke clears, right? It's saying where they know that the emergency responders come to these boxes to get into the building. So they're going to place a shooter here behind this tree. So when somebody does approach that box, they're going to shoot the first responder. So we have to be cognizant of the lives of the first responders too, and how the safety and security of their jobs and the job that they're doing is in perspective. But also on the medical side, the tactical, medical personnel that come in after the campus is cleared and things like that, that's huge, because implementing processes like stop the bleed, which Guy and I talked about extensively, several years ago in Colorado, and promoting those types of, programs inside the schools is huge. And mobile credentials assist in that too. Credentialing your school nurses within the school district for doing things like if a teacher has is instructing and then has a heart attack during a school session, accessing them quickly. Those types of things have to be considered too on the all hazards approach. So, all right, moving on this next slide, just another core advantages of mobile credentials, how it's helping besides the rapid emergency response, how it's helping on the business side through sustainability on the green LEED certified type things, through cybersecurity being more secure. On the credential management side, being able to manage all of these disparate credentials all over the place in a real-time environment. And then one of my favorites, I know you guys get a kick out of this too, is the George Costanza there on the bottom. George Costanza's, everybody knows who that is, but look at him. He's just trying to manage his own wallet with all these cards and things in it. So that gives
when I look at this slide, I love the George Costanza piece, and I think about that though. But that is a good analysis of how all of the things that as a security professional in K through 12 that we have to manage, especially when when a lot of people think a security director or security professional is going to be just responsible for technology or but when you look at it, they're responsible for emergency preparedness. They're responsible for implementing the protocols that a school district would typically utilize in emergencies. So when you look at that, anything that we can do that can organize a response to an active threat incident or day-to-day emergencies, that is a win-win for us as a security professional. And that's something we want in our wallet or in our laptop or our cell phone or our capabilities to facilitate a response when seconds matter. And I believe this is why, again, I don't have any financial interest in this or any type of other situation, but I look at this as something that's going to save lives down the road. We hope that we can get to an event to where there is a situation in the world where we don't have to worry. But regardless, even if we got to a place that there was no active threat incidents at schools, you're always going to have medical emergencies. You're always going to have a student that may go out of control or a parent that may go out of control. So any way that we can get in there and de-escalate that situation, or that's going to bring us the ability for that, again, that core of academic performance, that ability for the teachers to teach and the students to learn, is what we're doing here in a safe manner.
Yeah, oh, that's right. And I'll let Jeremy, add to that if he has anything to add.
No, I think for most of what folks are going to want to know is just what are we talking about? What is it? And so I think the best thing with the available time we have is just to get in there and show us what this technology is, how it works, show us the images. I mean, that's, I think we're just paint that picture with what's in front of us here. That'd be perfect, right?
Exactly. So, we'll pop through these because everybody knows cards get lost, key fobs get lost, and it's a huge vulnerability, right? Employees may not report this quickly. It's just human nature, right? Hours, days, weeks can go by and something can still be happening at the school. We can have the employee now needs a new card, takes time to provision all that. And the vulnerability of the assets we're protecting should be something that empowers us to say, hey, we need to do something about this. Next slide. So the key motivators for K-12 mobile credentials starts with the business side of things, right? At the CFO's office, the administrator level. And here's some real quick bullet points. Save on the cost of plastic cards, the consumables, ink, the card printers. All of those cost a tremendous amount of money, especially for the larger districts and the districts that have a lot of turnover, a lot of substitutes, a lot of paraprofessionals. Mobile credentials can be reissued and reusable. And one credential can be used on up to 5 devices. So this is just the technology replacing, human efforts and the older type ways of doing these things. So we save on time and labor costs, and believe it or not, in some cases, depending on who's in the badging office, could cost up to $50 per card all in.
Next slide. Okay.
So let's take this as an issuance department, right? It's usually run either from the human resources department or the security department, and IT has a lot to do with it. So I've been sitting at school districts in meetings where IT and HR are sitting there just talking about these nightmares that they're having, the distress calls, the lost badges, the late night school access needs that are happening, that they have to wake up, at midnight and let people in. And it's just doesn't have to happen, right? The supply chain issues on ordering cards and the things that happened, due to the COVID supply chain issues set us back a long time, set us back a year or more, sometimes many months for purchases. So that won't happen anymore. This is all, issued digitally, electronically, the same way that you get your key for a hotel. It's the same way. You go to an email, you accept it, you have it on your cell phone, and it works. Whether or not that app is connected doesn't matter. It's already on your cell phone. So contractors makes it very easy. Food service is a huge vulnerability. Anybody will tell you that does risk assessments. The risk of the different food service delivery people that are coming in that are not credentialed and they may change on a moment's notice without them notifying you. Huge, huge vulnerabilities. They're around children, they're around our kids and our employees, and around our food, right? So need to be cognizant of that. Installing mobile enabled readers, in my opinion, would be the first piece of this, right? That's the backbone. And when you have a mobile enabled reader, you don't have to use mobile with it. You can still use your cards, but it sets you up for an easier migration into the mobile world, right? And into that emergency rapid response that we're talking about. Guy, add anything, or Jeremy?
No, but I look at it like, what I'm looking at this as a security person is, all of the reasons you mentioned, but I also look at it as a way to organize an emergency response as well. Say in the aftermath of a school shooting, or a major incident such as a power outage, or something that we have to relocate. There's a lot of good things that this can do. For example, when we look at like businesses, for example, that you may relocate in an emergency, say a church, for example. A lot of these churches also have this access control initiatives or implementations in their facilities. So there's things that you could do with MOUs of understanding between the churches and those organizations, where your reunification centers, you could do, you can facilitate a response, not just a facility at your, multiple schools, but facilitate a response to other assets that are out in the communities that could support the school. So that would be something I look at in emergency and incident command, this being very valuable.
Yeah, and you're right on with that. There's a lot of education service centers and BOCES that come into the school to train. American Red Cross, different cross sections of state, local, and county government that come into the schools to teach classes, to hold health fairs, do vaccine clinics. All of that has a place here with the mobile credentials, and administration. That's why they call it administration. They administer, they administer these programs, and being able to credential parents, and during a parents' night, and stakeholders, and parent pickup for the children. And sometimes you have, divorced parents, things like that. It makes it a lot different. So there's many administrative benefits to this, and one of the big ones that I see, is the portable classrooms, right? So schools are growing so fast, and where I live, in Texas, it's hyper growth, right? So these portable classrooms are having to be established, and those portable classrooms, because of the audit and the new legislation that says that after Uvalde, all the doors have to be locked during class. They can't go into the main building anymore. They can't go into a campus building without calling somebody to let them in. It becomes a challenge. So this is some of the things that mobile credentials are used for right now that help with administration and the business issues, besides just safety and security. Next slide. So getting into the security advantages, I'll let Guy talk on this one.
Okay, so when I look at that, and I'll quickly, because we kind of went over this a little bit as we were going, but I, as a retired security director, and trying to help other security directors and security professionals around the country and the world, I really feel like this is an endeavor that, is a technology that wasn't available to us many years ago. Now it's available. It's not just HID, it's many, there's other card vendors out there. There's access control companies. Where we're going with this is a agnostic technology that can be deployed into K through 12 schools and will help to expedite response. So when you look at that, I look at it for law enforcement. And I look at that for security professionals out there. The Knox box has always been something that has been a concern for us. We put keys in the building for law enforcement. We might create as Jeremy did in his district, create blue boxes for law enforcement specific. But when we look at we look at this, the good thing about this is we're facilitating, and this is not just it can be customized from school to school. So if I was a security director still, and this would not replace our staff IDs, but there's a big difference when you're printing a staff ID on a ID card, for example, it's a lot cheaper to do so. Okay. So you could have your teachers and you could have your staff members. They could be using their phone for access into the facilities, but you're not doing away with the card, so to say.
Right.
When we look at like American Red Cross or, you know, facilities use groups, we look at that. Schools are not just open during the school day. They're open probably on average 18 to 20 hours a day because of facility use and athletic events and other things that are going on in the school. So when you have a facility use agreement with somebody, you could then partition that just that particular card and that particular area in the building to work with this endeavor. And well, it will keep them and their guests that they're over there educating or working with out of the areas you don't want them in the school. But when I look at this too, and we're going to get into that slide, is the ability to expedite a quick response in an emergency. Jeremy, do you have anything you'd like to say on this?
It actually looks like Jeremy may have dropped off, so we can
Mike?
probably move to the next slide.
Okay, we'll go to the next
I
slide.
think, yeah, I think
we're
you're
good.
having some trouble with the connection. So yeah, what I have to say is that when a school has active shooter drills, right? And I've been to school districts during these active shooter drills where afterwards law enforcement from and first responders from a cross section, you know, I think Guy, you had like 8 different agencies respond, you know, when the events happened at your school district. They come in and they train on active shooter. They go to the cafeteria afterwards, have a bite, talk, and they're gone. Right? You talk to them maybe next year, maybe your next active, you know, shooter drill is a year away, 2 years away, and they leave. If you provision them with mobile credentials, at that point, they know the school, they know the diagram of the school, as we're going to show here, as we're going to see here, and they know how to navigate that campus and where the classrooms are. And now with the duress buttons and the pinpoint accuracy and the first responder door numbering system, which you're about to see, it just makes it that much more, you know, streamlined. And really, it's a life savings and the ability to get there quickly is what we're promoting today. So we'll go through this slide real quick.
Okay, so if you go to page 31 on the guidelines, and many of you that are school officials or law enforcement officials have implemented a emergency response or first responder numbering system at your facilities. I've seen them in places, even in very rural places. I've seen them in an assessment I just did here in probably one of the most rural places in the United States. What we're seeing, though, is it's a very valuable system that helps to facilitate a response into a school quickly. But when we look at that, for example, when we think about that first responder numbering system and being, how do I say this, enabling the law enforcement and other officials that may need that system to respond to a school or day-to-day business, is ensuring that we have these card readers as we do the first responder numbering system, is ensuring that we also have a card reader or reader that could enable access control and enable access into these doors and these different zones. So when you look at this on, like I said, on page 31 of the guidelines, you'll see that, but those blue stars could indicate like what we're seeing is installing a reader in these different locations. So as responders come to the schools and they're using the number system, they can use these doors that are electrified with the readers to get in there and quickly. But we also, another piece that we would see that is very popular in schools now, and especially with new construction or very significant retrofits, is internal partitioning of schools, for example, and having internal card readers in, say, a zone, for example, the B-side zone, where you'll see like on that map there, having a card reader in that hallway and having that door. So if a bad guy comes in, that number one into the main entrance there and the zones lock up, then that would, in technicality, would deter, detect, or delay that person from getting into those other areas, buying time for those responders to engage them tactically. But when we look at like what a Knox box, for example, for law enforcement, when we think about that, in many cases, they're installed by the main entrance, or they might be installed in an alternative entrance location. But again, they could, if the threat or the person knows about that, or the way that they're deployed in many schools, they could be a vulnerability to those law enforcement trying to obtain those keys. So what we're looking at is giving the ability for law enforcement or responders to tactically respond more quickly, and maybe even use this to their advantage to engaging a person or persons that may be a threat to the school. But I also believe, as an old timer, is using systems for multiple different types of situations. When I look at this, I'd be using this in an all hazard type of sense, so to say. I have a kid out of control in the classroom, getting to him quickly and efficiently is most important. So I'm going to get to the next slide because we're running out of time real quick here. Okay.
So before you do, Guy,
Sure.
a school campus with multiple levels,
Mm-hmm.
right? So how would this, how would you advise our listeners here to do that?
Well, if we're seeing that we're seeing a one level school from page 31 of our guidelines, but if we had a multiple level school, having that ability, the same kind of diagram on the ground level to be able to get in, but also internal partitioning. So when you look at a door, for example, doors and things like that are in place, interior wise, is partitioning off those doors. So obviously you have to have egress, for fire code and things, but partitioning that, so if the assailant is in the D side and the C side has an upper level, having the C side partitioned up, but say the bad guy's on the upper floor of C side, for example, having that the law enforcement, the ability to get in, maybe C side number 4 entrance there might be a compromise to the responders getting into there. They might not be able to protect themselves, but having the D side and an internal card reader, say where door number 6 is, and getting into that upper wing, that gives the law enforcement a tactical advantage. And that's the type of thing when we look at the first responder numbering system and we look at access control, is number 1, detect, deter, delay, or deny, but also 2, the ability to use this tactically for our response into a facility.
Love it. Yeah, that's exactly right. And there's nowhere to hide at that point. So I'm gonna again let Guy talk about this. He's got some really good insight on this, and this is something that he and I have talked about many times on pinpoint accuracy, in times of crisis, what first responders need to know to respond appropriately and quickly, rapidly. And he's done a lot of work with the duress systems and the duress buttons in fulfillment of Alyssa's law and some of the mandates that are coming out for the schools. And I think his view and our talk about how mobile credentials is an enabling technology here combined with location services is really cutting edge. So go ahead.
Okay, so in a crisis, as we said, we're beating a horse over the dead horse. But in a crisis, the speed of response is tied to the responders knowing the location. So when we look at that, a lot of the new duress systems that we have, the ones that we at PASS agree that supervise, the ones that provide location services, this could be combined with that. So if there is a duress line alarm in a school, for example, or duress notification, that ability to drill down with precision will be very critical. In the large campuses, as we talked about, with multiple floors, room entrances, or building, SROs and first responders need to know exact locations to respond appropriately and distinguish between floors. So when you look at the first responder numbering system and you look at how that's laid out, it lays out the corridors and how we can gain access quickly into the school. So when we look at that with deploying the card readers in that kind of fashion, or the readers in that kind of fashion, that will help us to get in there quickly and expediently. But another important thing is we look at security systems or access control systems that this is going to be combined with. We could talk about, I won't give brands and things, but there are some that are very, extensive in unifying life safety components such as mass notification and the video management systems, the dress systems, and having that all real time on there with these access control systems is very, very important, because this can help to drill down using those technologies and getting into the schools as quickly as importantly as possible. Because let's face it, VMS systems and access control systems, there are typically our unification platforms that allow us to unify all these different technologies into the schools. So really, in a way, when we look at technology, I have the, I've always said this for many years, security systems start with access control. So when we look at this is allowing us the ability to respond quickly to any kind of alarm or situation that we may have in that school. And it will empower law enforcement. It will empower even fire. If fire wants to go this route, I think it'd be better, because it's not a knockoff seconds or even minutes to getting to the Knox boxes. So it's saving precious minutes when seconds count, and allowing personnel or medical personnel to, for example, to deliver stop the bleed assistance to save lives. Or get in there if an employee has a heart attack during business hours, quickly and efficiently with the least disruption to the facilities, but also to facilitating an emergency response in all situations. Okay.
It's very, very, very well said. And all of that, we take it to heart. It happens, and that's the way we respond to it, right? So even now, the training that's being given, there's a program out there, the Future Educators Respond to Emergency Situations. There's training now for the teachers, for the administrators and the staff on emergency response. There's different training programs. This one comes from Indian River State College, and it's talking about training the teachers, to do some of these things as well, and to participate in it. So yeah, it's really, there's no limit to it. And this next slide talks about how the universities are using it and using mobile credentials in their model to do some of the same things we've talked about, save money, increase business processes on everything from doors to data to the dorm rooms. But this slide right here just gives a bird's eye view of how these school-age children in K through 12, when they graduate and go to college, are using their mobile phones, and how the employees at the universities are using them in a multiple use cases, 100% use case type environment. And, everything from, making copies and for the kids, buying food at the food service, entering their dorms, entering the classrooms. It is a huge thing in the universities. It is definitely something that our university, education group is talking about on a daily basis to the big universities, everything from Ivy League to the state colleges. So, this is something that goes far beyond K-12 and goes into K-20, and eventually will, if the universities are dictating what we do, eventually we'll go into K-12 as well. And some of those one card providers are going to start looking at K-12. You have Apple, Apple districts, right? And you have Google school districts. So all of that will start coming downhill. So, it'd be great to be prepared for it. And the way you prepare for it in this new world is mobile credentials. So as we progress this slide, we're going to see what we used to use a lot of in K through 12, in showing how at the bottom tier, next to eating and drinking and sleeping, we're safety. And when kids feel safe and secure, they learn more, they live more, they love more. They in the school environment, they feel good about themselves, right? So right now, on the basic needs, their cell phone in their hand is something that they absolutely need to feel safe. So it's really interesting how this works out. And we wanted to throw this slide in there just to show how, how massive this undertaking really could be.
Okay, so So in the interest of time, there's some really good questions here, and I think we should look at them. So one of this, an anonymous tenant, they're all anonymous. Any thoughts given to any emergency cases? Personnel don't carry their mobile phones. Gym teacher put phone aside in the locker room. Well, I'm going to say I am not advocating in any way for this to replace a gym teacher or any staff member's ID card. I think I made that quite clear earlier in this presentation. I believe, I've seen this as a security director. ID cards for staff members with a picture that identifies them is a very important endeavor in the schools. However, when I would say that, when we look at a substitute teacher on those, is giving them a dummy ID card was what we used to call them. I don't mean they were dummies, but we called it a blank card that didn't have access control credentials. It just had their position and identified them as an employee of the school district. I think that's, important. So we're not in any way advocating for that to happen. How do you address reluctance towards using personnel devices for professional work? So again, I think when we're addressing that, we're not advocating for a staff member in a school to replace their ID card with this type of technology. So, however, as a police officer or school security director or somebody that's doing response to the school, you are often supplied your own cell phone from your employer to come in and respond to these situations. So there are ways for a school district to get around this. But again, we're not trying to advocate for the teachers or the others to replace their staff ID cards with this, or their access control credentials. We're just advocating for a way to facilitate emergency response into the schools, and also facilitate substitute teachers to be able to go in there.
During a lockdown, cards
we don't want
won't-
people using cards. Their
cards
phones
won't work anyway. So you hit the duress button, so they know exactly where the duress is happening. Mike Garcia, math teacher, math room, boom, door 2 is right across the hall. That's where they want to enter. So all of that, and we're talking about pinpoint accuracy on the response, works.
Here's another really good question. How do you address situations where personnel forget phone or have connectivity issues or have run out of battery? There needs to be some kind of backup mechanism. Could you answer that question, Mike? And I can answer some insight into that after you're done.
Yeah, well, I'm going to answer it from the perspective of what they're doing in the universities, right? So right now, they have the wallet programs for mobile, right? And in the wallet programs, let's take Apple, for instance. Apple Wallet allows your phone, after your phone dies, 5 minutes of access capability on that, right? So it depends. My answer is it depends on what type of program you're using on the mobile credentials, so that can happen. So there's some that if your battery dies, it won't work, and there's other programs where it will work. So it just depends on what you're looking for and what the best size to fit you is. And there's
I would say too, going into this, the interest of time, when we think about these kind of systems, one of the things that we have is when you have a unified command and have that ability to control your doors, is when you look at your people's roles and processes on the district level, is to address these types of failures via other avenues. For example, overriding the doors, having situational monitoring from your command center, having that ability to have, when I look at access control and many of the systems that are out there, most of them have a capability to be able to monitor and respond and overcome these difficulties. And then we have a couple more questions really quick to get through. Do you see challenges with teachers using, from Sam Phelps? Good question. For professional security purposes? Oh, heck yeah, I agree with that. But again, we're not advocating for this to replace a teacher's ID card or access control card. So we're talking mainly for substitute teachers, and we're talking, or staff members or contractors, law enforcement, in a whole gamut of an all hazards type of situation and going in there.
So there's one last question here, Guy. There's one last question from Eli that's pretty important. Brings up a good thought process. I know we have like a minute left. Our parents are wanting to have their K through 6th graders to wear iWatches to communicate with their kids. So we have to be really cognizant as school leaders of COPA, right? The Child Online Privacy and Protection Act. Under 13 years of age, you cannot accept a EULA on your own, right? So be real cognizant of that as a district. Again, as Guy said, this isn't replacing, the identity badges or, the badges that we use on a daily basis in the school.
It could, but again, you have to have your good roles and processes.
Yeah,
Okay.
and you want to be, of course, you want to be able to see, right, that person belongs there, right? And when they're challenged, they can present that credential. But for first responders, for this rapid response that we're talking about, absolutely critical.
Are there any grants available to assist districts with upgrades such as mobile credentials or other security systems? Mike, you've been working on that with many of your clients out there. Any answers you can give, Mr. Dooley?
Yes. So we went over this yesterday at the conference I'm at right now. There's too many to name, honestly, right now. The biggest one is from the federal government, and the president signed off on it a couple of months ago. And this one, right, this one is going to have mental health, and it's going to have the duress and the SROs together with it. It's about $1 billion, right? So that's coming out there really, really quick. You need to keep an eye on it. Everything else is state level grants, right? But what I will tell you is when you use the past guidelines to apply for the grants and what you've invested in safety and security, you put on the left side, what past recommends on the right side, in the middle will be the gaps. And when you fill out these grants, if you understand what your gaps are and you tell them what you're going to use the grant money for when you receive it, you're more apt to get it. So using the past guidelines to apply for these grants and using the information you're learning today and on this summer session, these 3 summer sessions that we're having, it really helps.
In closing, everybody, with the interest of time, we thank you for attending this webinar. If you have any questions, you can contact us through the pastk12.org, or my email address is guygrace50@gmail.com. Michael has email. We can facilitate and answer any more of your questions about this. There are some really good questions in here, but what we're thinking, again, what we are implying this to is customization for a school district. But also too, when you talk about funding, think about this. Many of you already have, and users already have, these card readers that are compatible with this in place at your school district right now. So think about that. And that's the thing we can help you identify if you're already there. So we thank you for attending this webinar, and please www.pastk12.org, download our recommendations and guidelines from there. And thank you for attending today's webinar.